All right, hope everyone is fed and watered. So you should have been able to grab either from Pastebin or from my GitHub, my copy of our add to cart page. And if I just view the page source, just want to make sure that those product IDs are in there. So our hidden field, you can see I've got different product IDs. So product ID of 2, and on my sweater, I've got product ID 6. So that's important that those hidden fields are here. I also had a student after class on Monday who stopped and said, it doesn't work. Every time I add to cart, there's no product there. And that was because they had mistyped the word product ID. So make sure you spell it correctly in your input. Okay, so this page is done. We don't need to do anything else with it, but we do have some work to do on our product details page. So, what do you think? We've got this scaffolded page. It's functional, but it needs some work. What changes do we need to make here? I could think of, yep, Dan, good suggestion. So we can basically copy that form into it. Yep, Lindsay, good idea. Let's not show this. Let's show either our actual image or our placeholder. So again, we can kind of copy and paste some of this stuff from our browse. Yep, so our heading is kind of wonky. That says details product. And up here it says details. Maybe let's just have it say product details as one heading. Yep, all that's good. I can see a couple other little changes. Yeah, let's get rid of the edit link. Customers shouldn't be able to do that. And what about this link? Right, and the admin, they've got a separate edit view already. So the admin doesn't really need this page. Where does this go if I click back to list? You can see the address in my little status bar at the bottom left of my browser. Where's this going to take me? If I click back to list. Right, because it's trying to load the products index, which is for administrators. So we might keep this, but we want to change where it goes. We basically just want it to return to the previous page. Well, should it go all the way to the categories or just back to the list of products in the selected category? If you're shopping, would you want to have to go all the way back to the first page? Yeah, so we basically can use a little JavaScript so that it basically just goes back one item in the browser, one page in the browser history. You know, I might want to buy this product. I go in here and then I say, nah, maybe this isn't what I want. So I just click back. It should take me back to the previous page with the same list of products. So let's make these changes to our product details. So I'm going to open up products and details. Yeah, we'll give you a really simple JavaScript that lets you basically simulate the back button in the browser being clicked. So you go to the previous page, but rather than reloading, it's just pulled from cache. So it's in the exact same state, which is useful. So I'm going to modify lines 4, 8, and 11. On line 4, I'm going to change the heading to say product details. I'll do the same on line 8. And then my line 11, my H4 that says product, now we can just get rid of this. So now our headings make a little more sense. Product details on line 4. Product details on line 8. If you don't change these, no problem. It's not going to affect how your page works at all, which is fine. Now down here on line 35, this is where it's printing out the image name. So I want to grab that if statement from our browse page, paste it in here, and then we'll just have to change the variable name. So this way we can display either the product image or the placeholder. So let's go back to browse. And let's copy this if statement that's checking whether the product has an image or not. If it does, we're going to render it. If it doesn't, we're going to render the placeholder instead. So I'm going to copy that if statement, and we're going to have to change our variable name, just fine. So I'm going to replace line 35. So line 35 is just printing out the image name as a string. I'm going to paste this in instead. But my p variable on line 35 and line 37, it's not recognized. I've got to change that to our model. Yes, you could set as a string the name and just render one image tag. Yep, that would work too, Jeffrey. That'd be fine. So I'll just see if that works. Just click in. I'll try a product with our image, and then I'll try a separate product with the placeholder. Absolutely, there's rarely in .NET, rarely only one right way to do things. As Mike had a different suggestion earlier. Jeffrey, you're suggesting we could do that logic earlier. Absolutely. My way is not always the right way. It's not necessarily even the best way. So for sure, you're free to experiment, write the code differently. Okay, so on my sweater, I get our product. And if I pick this one, I get my placeholder. So that's working. I'm going to take out line 53 entirely. It's got our edit link. So what I'm going to do here on our back link, I'm going to take out the ASP action, and this is where we're going to use JavaScript to go one page back in the browser history. So we'll use an href equals, and we can link to JavaScript : This then allows us to call a JavaScript function. So the function we want is history.go -1. This is the exact same as if the user clicked the browser's back button one time. It loads the previous page in the browser history from cache. Yeah, it's very useful. And it's generic, so we might use it other places or use it in other applications. So now if I'll refresh, I mean, we could change it to call our browse method all over again and pass in the category ID, but it's going to be faster to just get it from cache. It's automatic. The page doesn't have to actually load again, and our browse method doesn't have to get invoked again because we're just pulling up the cached version. So now the last thing we need, and again, then I'll put the whole version up on Pastebin for you if you need it, is we want to copy our form. Now we'll have to reformat it, maybe just a little bit. So I'm going to go back to my browse page. I'm going to copy this form. So we'll copy it. And then, where do we want to put it? Let's see. Still inside our div, so right before our closing div, I'm going to put it here. I'll just paste it in here below our category name. A minute, got to close my window. Someone's doing some work outside. So much for the warm, fresh air. So let's see how this looks. I think I'm going to have to make one little CSS adjustment to it. That's interesting. What happened there? Where's my form? Oh, right. Thank you. My variable is wrong. So this needs to be our model.id. Thank you, Jeffrey. So the P variable in our hidden input, that doesn't apply. Good catch. I love having a team of 24 talented debuggers. We'll try that again. Okay, so now here's our form. I also just want to maybe move it over here instead. So I'll maybe just add a class to the form. I'll do call, actually, offset SM2. So this should align the form underneath all of our inputs. Not critical. But I want to bump my form over 2 columns so it appears underneath all the product values. Not essential. Put one of these in my cart and add. And now we get a blank because our add to cart method, that's still to come. So our form is complete. I will copy this for anybody who needs it. So again, you're seeing how we can scaffold a page to save time and then customize it so it looks more polished, looks better, and also has any additional functionality that the scaffolding doesn't give us. So for our next trick, we now need to make add to cart functional. We're clicking it, it's calling an add to cart method. That method doesn't exist. Okay. And in fact, if I go and look at my database for a minute, whoops, Wednesday database, I don't even think we have right now. I'll have to copy it over. Right now, we don't even have a table in the database to store the shopping cart items. I think the only tables we've got are identity tables, and then we've got products and categories. So we need a carts table. So before we can add to cart, we've got to create a new model, put it in our application DB context, and run a migration to copy that table down to our database. So to build the cart model, I meant to put it here on Blackboard, but I don't think I did yet. So bear with me, and I will just put that class up for us, for everyone. To save a bit of time, give me a moment. I'll grab it.
The cart model is in week 8. It's at the very bottom.
Ah, okay, thank you, Lindsay. I appreciate that. I will drag it up, which doesn't always work in Firefox. So I did put it in there, but I neglected to drag it up. Thanks for letting me know. Again, you guys are saving me tons of time. So in week 8, it is down at the bottom. Sometimes the dragging doesn't work in Firefox, but I'll drag it up. Okay, if you refresh your week 8 folder, here's the cart model. So we need to, I'm going to copy the code that's in here, and I'm going to create a new model called cart. So copy those properties, and I'll go to models. I will right click and I'm going to add a class, which I will call cart singular with a capital C. The extension is optional. And I get an empty class called cart. I'm just going to paste in the definition. That's here. So our cart's going to have a primary key. Every item will have a product ID foreign key. It's going to have a customer ID, which will be a little complex. We'll deal with that later. We need to know how many the customer wants. We'll give it a timestamp. We also want to know the price. And then we have a reference to the parent object, which is product. So there's a one-to-many relationship. One product can be in many shopping carts, but one shopping cart item has one and only one product. So let's save that. So just paste it in as it is. You don't have to make any changes. Now, in order to, well, Jeffrey, this is just a model. It's not a controller. So the models don't typically have methods. They're basically just class objects. Yes, we will want to calculate the total, but we're going to do that in the cart method of our shop controller. And the total isn't necessarily for each line item. We'll calculate a total for the order as a whole using the quantity and price of each line item. Wouldn't be wrong. You could put a total in here, not really necessary because we can always calculate it. So now we need to set up our database migration. It is a really good question, though, that you asked. So I'm going to open up under data. I'm going to open up my application DB context. And now we need to add a third DB set object of type cart. So underneath or above, we're going to create a DB set of type cart that I will call carts. That is readable and writable. So the DB set class from Entity Framework, it's used to run queries and save instances of the cart. So we're going to save this in our application DB context. So now that our application is set up with this new model, we need to create and execute a database migration that will take a copy of our cart model and build a matching table called carts in the database. So we're going to go to our package manager console and run a migration. We've got package manager console here. So line 16 is new in my application DB context. So I'm going to add a migration, call it create carts. So this part is just a friendly name. It's just a description. I'm describing what's happening in this migration. And there can't be any spaces in the migration name. You don't have to call it create carts. You can call it create carts table, call it whatever you like. but there can't be spaces in it. So I'm going to hit enter. And when this code runs, it's going to build a new script file, which will open up in Visual Studio. And it's going to use the migration builder to create a table called carts with these columns and this foreign key, the product ID foreign key. So now if I want to commit that to the database, I run the command update -database. And I'm going to hit enter. Once this is done, I can go to Management Studio, and if I refresh my database, we now have a new carts table. So we need to build the cart model. We need to declare the DB set in application DB context. And then in Package Manager console, we add a migration and we update the database. Those 4 steps are going to give us our new carts table. Now that we have this table, we can start to write our add to cart method. So we can take the quantity the user entered, take the product ID that they've picked, and we can save a new entry in here. So once you've got your carts table done, we want to go back to our shop controller and we want to start writing our add to cart method. And this is a post method. Right? It receives a form post. So we've got to declare this as HTTP post. We also want to validate against cross-site scripting. So if we validate any anti-forgery tokens, users cannot build a form on another website and post it to our add to cart. So that's some extra security. So we're going to create our method called add to cart. And this method's going to take 2 parameters. We already discussed earlier what those parameters are, right? In order to add to a cart, we need to know what product does the user want and how many. So both are integers. So our first parameter is our product ID. And our second parameter is our quantity. And these parameter names, they've got to match exactly what's in our little add to cart form. So I've spelled them both in Pascal case. So capital P and capital I, as well as capital Q. That matches the inputs. So here's my name equals product ID and name equals quantity. So our method parameter names match the input names exactly. So we'll write out the steps we need here. So first, we want to look up the current product price. Second, set the customer. And this will be a little tricky. We'll come back to this. Create a new cart object. So this would be create, populate a new cart object. Then we want to save to the carts table in the database. once this is all done, once we add the item to cart and we can see that it's in the database, what do we want to do for the user? As a customer, when you're shopping, there's a few different options. What do you expect to see after you put an item in your cart when you're shopping online? Okay.
A populated cart?
Yeah, so we want to see the total. And yeah, I think, Kevin, that was, we could continue shopping or we could go to the cart. So what we're going to do is build a cart page. We'll redirect them to that cart page. So we don't need an add to cart view. So we will redirect to cart page. So the user can see, they'll be able to see everything in the shopping cart. So all the items with the quantities and the prices and the total. And yes, we will have, Jeffrey, and Jillian, a keep shopping or a continue shopping, as well as a checkout button. So we will build a cart method as well, and we'll build that page today. Okay, so these are all the things that are going to happen inside our add to cart. So first we need the price. So we can go products, context.products.find, and pass in the primary key .price. So we don't need to get the whole product. We just need one field there. We just need the product. So we know that we need the price. The customer part's going to be a bit tricky, so we're going to come back to this one in a bit. I'll just create a variable called customer ID. For the moment, I'm just going to hard code this as a string. We'll deal with the customer ID after. Let's get the ability to save to the database first, and then we'll deal with the customer ID because there's some extra logic here that's going to be a bit tricky. So then I'll create a new object. So we're going to create a new cart, and then we want to start to populate. So our product ID is going to be equal to the product ID from our form. The quantity is going to come from the quantity parameter in our form. The price is going to come from our price query. Our customer ID, we're just hard coding this for now. Once this is working, we'll change it. And our date created, we can just use a built-in .NET function, datetime.now. So that'll give us the current date and time. So this creates a new cart object in memory. We're instantiating it by calling constructor. Well, actually, I guess it's a model. Sorry, we don't really need a constructor. So we're creating and populating the values. So now we know what product did they want, how many do they want, how much does it cost currently, what's the current date and time, and the customer, well, we're kind of faking, we're fudging that one for now, but we'll clean it up after. Now, we haven't actually written any code to save to the database before. So far, all of the saving in our application, the scaffolding is doing. For example, if I go and look at my products controller in my create method in the post, here's where the save actually happens. We call context.add, and we add a new object, and then we call context save changes. So that's basically what we need to do here. Context.carts.add. And then we can call save changes. In the scaffolded code, those calls are made asynchronously. We could use asynchronous code. I don't really need to, so it's just a little simpler without. So this is going to save to the database. And then lastly, instead of returning a view, we want to call the cart method. We don't have that method yet, but that's okay. We'll build it after. We're going to call redirect to action. I will put all this code up on Pastebin for you. So here's the complete method. Take in the product ID and quantity the customer wanted. Figure out how much the product costs and store it in a variable. For now, just hard code the customer ID, create a new cart instance, and populate it with our product, our quantity, our price, our customer, and timestamp it to the current date and time. Add this new object to our cart DB set. Excuse me. Save to the database, and then call the cart method. So when all this runs, I'm looking for two results here. Number one, I want to see a new record saved to the carts table. Number two, our URL should redirect to shop/cart, which doesn't exist. So right now we're just going to get a blank screen. That's fine. So I'm going to put all this on Pastebin in case you need it. And then we're going to try it out. We may have to make some adjustments, but I think we're on the right track. So there's your method. Excuse me. And we should be able to call it from the product details page or from our shop browse page. It's both going to go to the same place. So I'm going to try this. I want one beige sweater. So let's see what happens. Okay, I'm not sure why my server died, but I will restart it. So I'm going to shop. Go to shirts. Pick one. Add to cart. Okay, so blank screen that calls add to cart. Let's see if there's anything in my database. So if I right-click my carts table and select my top 1,000 rows, let's see if anything got saved. If not, we've got some adjustments to make. Okay, so I've got nothing. So our code obviously is not quite right. Let's figure out why. So what's happening? It called the shop method add to cart. Yes, customer ID is text. Mike will look at why in a moment. Okay, well, this is where our debugger is helpful. I'm going to put a breakpoint here on my add to cart. And this time I'll start debugging. You can watch and see what's happening here. We'll see if our add to cart method even gets called. There may be an error before that. Yeah, we've got to make, obviously something isn't quite right because it's not working quite as I intended. So we'll debug it and figure out why. Okay, I'll pick one. Okay, our method, interesting. My method's never even getting called. So this may be on the front end. I'm going to go into my console. The character of the plane. Ah, that's why. Okay, I'm not entirely sure what that means. It may have to do with this validate anti-forgery token, which I might take out just for now. Just going to see if there's anything in this form. Our scaffolded form, there doesn't seem to be. Okay. I'm going to try taking that out for a moment. I'll just comment out my anti-forgery token for now. And try again. That may be my problem. Yep, Daniel, we already have. So good point. So in the form, right, there's the action. That does link to the add to cart. So yes, we want to do that. We've already done that. So our button is actually calling the method. It may be the anti-forgery token that prevented the method from running. I'm going to try it again. And then I want to try it from both. Yeah, okay. So now it redirects me to cart. And if I query the database again, now I've got product ID 6, quantity 1. At the right price, current date and time. Okay, good. What if I order something using my product details? So I'll get a couple of these, add to cart. Yep, it goes to my cart. And when we check the database, there's now 2 items in my cart. One of product ID 6 and 2 of product ID 3. So I'm not going to worry about the anti-forgery token for now. I'm going to just leave that out. Ultimately, we'll want it, but for now, we'll just move on. So mostly working. So I just had to take out that validate anti-forgery token decorator above my method. The code inside the method was correct. But now we need to deal with our customer ID. This worked, but we faked it. This is not a solution because it can't hard code the customer ID. Otherwise, everyone's cart all gets mashed together. And I don't know which customer is buying which product. So this is not really a long-term solution. So what can we do about this? Notice we're shopping. I'm shopping as an anonymous user. Now, I could force users to log in just to put something in their cart. But most e-commerce sites don't require you to do that. You might have to sign in when you go to checkout, but just to shop and total up your cart, most sites let us do this anonymously. So how can we distinguish? We don't want to hard code the customer as test customer. What could we do to ensure that each person shopping and putting the items in their cart is unique? Yet one person, yeah, we can use a GUID. But then how can we tie that GUID? Yep, you got it. So Jeffrey and Jillian, you guys have hit on the solution. We're going to use a GUID and we're going to generate a GUID and then we're going to store it in the session. So that way that ID is attached to that user so long as their browser session stays open. And it will be different for each user in each different browser. And Mike, coming back to your question, this is why our customer ID is going to be a string and not an integer, because those GUIDs, those are string values. And if someone was shopping when they were logged in, we could even just use their email address to identify them. So in order to do this, we're going to need a method here. So I'm going to take out where it says test customer, and we're going to call a method instead, get customer ID. Now this method doesn't exist right now. So we want to create a string method that will check the session to see if there's already an identifier in there. And if there isn't, we're going to use a GUID to generate a new identifier. So now I can, let's see if, so what I want to do is I want to create a method in my shop controller called get customer ID. So we want this to return a string. So create a new string method called get customer ID. We're going to take out line 77, the throwing of an error. So we want to check if there is already a customer ID session variable. So if, and the session object in .NET, it's part of the HTTP context class. And I've put a link to the documentation around this class on Blackboard. If you want to read more about how the HTTP context works, there's a link right here. So session is a child object of this class. So session has a couple of get methods. It can get a byte, it can get an integer, or it can get a string. So we'll call get string customer ID. So if it's null, that means we don't have an ID for this customer. This is the first item in their cart. So we need to generate a GUID and then put that GUID into the session. So if it's null, this is the first item in this user's cart. Generate GUID and store in session variable. So in this case, HTTP context.session.setString. So we're going to create a new session variable called customer ID. And we're going to set it equal to GUID.newGUID.toString. And we'll need a reference. Whoops, new GUID is a method. Sorry, we don't need a reference. I just need the brackets. So create a new session variable and use a GUID to populate it. And then our method returns a string, so we want to send back the session variable. If the session variable's already been created because they've already put something in their cart, we'll just send it back. So then we're going to return we'll just send back get string customer ID. So I'll put this up on Pastebin. We can try it out. There is another adjustment I can tell you right now. There is one other thing we're going to have to do. So now we're not hard coding the customer anymore. We're going to call the method that's going to check if the session variable exists, and if it doesn't, we'll use a GUID to create it. So I'm going to try the code this way. We'll see what happens. So I'm going to go and put something different in my cart, and then we can see what the customer ID looks like. I mean, we've already used a GUID in saving our images, so you have an idea of what that GUID will look like. So I'll go to shirts. I need a couple of t-shirts. Okay, and here's what we get. Session has not been configured. What does that mean? So this crashed here when we tried reading the session variable. Session has not been configured. So what does that suggest to you is missing? Or why would we get this error? Our code compiled fine. We're not missing any references. So what is that error? Yeah, Dan, you're close. Right, okay. So by default, in .NET Core, session support is not enabled. Because sessions add overhead to the application, and .NET Core is supposed to be really lightweight and fast, sessions are not enabled automatically. We can use them, but we're going to have to configure the application or the specific request to use a session. So if we want, and we're going to need sessions as well, not just for this request, but when they go to pay, we're going to want to store the whole order in a session variable. So what file do you think we should go to configure the sessions? It's only a couple lines of code. Which file do we use to set application-wide configuration values? Okay, Jeffrey, could be if it was just a single value, yes, but we need to programmatically enable session support. Well, Kevin, layout does, but layout is basically global user interface. Yep, Kevin, you got it, in startup, right? Same place we configured like our Google and Microsoft authentication. So we need 2 short lines of code in startup, and then this should work. So I'm going to go to startup. So in here, I'm going to put it before we enable controllers with views on line 47. So right underneath my Google section. So we're going to enable sessions. Services.add session. We also need it in the configure method, a slightly different version. We're adding it, and we're going to have to tell the app to use sessions down below in configure. So in configure services, we're adding sessions support. And then in configure, I'll put it down here. I'm not sure it really matters where it goes. Enable sessions. So app.use session. So we've got services.add session and app.use session. This should make that error go away. So sessions are turned off by default. We need these 2 lines of code in startup so that we can use sessions. So add session goes in configure services. Use session goes inside of the configure method. So I'll go back and try again. This time we should be able to add, and our customer ID should be some form of GUID. And it's stored in the session. So if I add multiple items to my cart within one browser session, it should be the same GUID each time. So let's see, I'll add 3 t-shirts. My error goes away. That's a good sign. Excuse me. And now I've got quantity 3, and now I've got a GUID that starts with AC17. If I go back and add another product, so now same session, these are tied together. I'm going to try a different browser now just to make sure I get a different customer ID. So I'll just go and grab my shop link. You don't have to do this, but I just want to verify we've done it correctly. So in Firefox, my customer ID is AC17. In Chrome, I can buy a sweater. But I have a different customer ID, starts with B29. Okay, if you're getting a null value, then there's something wrong here. So your get customer ID is not returning. It's not generating and returning string. Okay, it does. So my version does seem to be working. Now it's 125. So what I'm going to do here, yep, you may have to, yep, you could use toString, or even here toString in case it's empty, but that's suggesting your method's not returning anything. Okay, here's what we're going to do. This code seems to be accurate, so I'm going to push this now so you can check yours versus what's on GitHub. Okay. The link is on Blackboard in Weekly Learning Tools and Resources. So here's our add to cart. So I'm going to push now. Yes, when you created the function, it did come up as private object. You've got to change it so that it returns a string. So that may be the issue. If you just right-clicked and let Visual Studio generate the method, which is what I did, by default, the return type was an object. So we're not returning an object, we're going to return a string, right? We're calling getString here, so it should be cast as a string. So I've pushed up to GitHub. We'll take a 10-minute break here so you can compare what you've got to what's in my my .NET Duds repository, and we'll come back and we'll build our cart page. Shouldn't be a full hour, maybe another half hour today. So we should still wrap up around 2 o'clock, a bit after, I would hope. Let's take a break here.